Melissa Root. I own a company called Root Success Solutions. Just opened the company this summer. And really the goal of the company is to increase performance, reduce stress, and improve quality of life for people. And that includes practitioners and students. And the biggest focus of the company right now is actually getting video self-modeling out into practitioners' hands, because it is such a fantastic intervention. Both Melissa Bray and I have been practicing it since the 1990s, and it's time for it to get out into people's hands and really get used, because there's fantastic research behind it. So that's the largest focus of my company. I also do consulting, case consulting in schools, and offer psychoeducational evaluations as a certified school psychologist here in Connecticut. And previously, I've been a faculty member at the University of Connecticut, the University of St. Joseph, and Mitchell College, where I taught both students with and without disabilities in different subject areas, including psychology, autism assessment, classroom management, and math, actually. And now I'll let Melissa Bray introduce herself.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Melissa Bray. I'm a professor at the University of Connecticut, and I direct the school psychology program. I'm also a licensed psychologist and a certified school psychologist and a licensed speech-language pathologist. I've taught at the university level for 20 years, just about, or more. And before that, I worked in the public schools. So like Melissa said, I've done quite a bit of research on video self-modeling, and I'm happy to share with you today how to use it out in the schools.
We'll move ahead to the next slide here. So the plan for this afternoon, for the next hour or so, is we'll talk about Picture Perfect, the book itself, and the assets that it contains that we think are useful for practitioners. And then we'll go briefly into video self-modeling, the technique, and we'll talk about the definition and a brief but interesting history of it. And then Melissa Bray will start talking to you about the practical applications of video self-modeling, and there are many of them. So what we're covering is sort of a broad stroke of examples, but there are many more available to you. This is sort of an intro for you. So the book itself, Picture Perfect, really is, we designed it to take the intervention from the research level and really make it practical, hands-on, usable for practitioners. So we broke it down into 7 steps that you can use and follow every time you use the intervention. I think one of my favorite parts about the book is the fact that we've designed several downloadable data forms and planning forms that you can use to help you brainstorm how to use the intervention, and then also to take data on it. And they're free, downloadable forms. You can use them for this intervention. You can use them for other interventions. They're really applicable across the board. And then we came up with numerous examples where we superimpose those 7 steps across examples from the research to really give you some good ideas of how you can use video self-modeling. And we also have a visual guide in the back of the book that lets you know, hey, if I have a student coming into my classroom who might have, let's say, autism, and I don't know the student very well, and I want to brainstorm some ways maybe I can use video self-modeling, we have a beautiful visual that has, autism in the center, and then has some branches off of it that says, well, perhaps you want to use it for, social initiating. Perhaps you want to use it for working on transitions. Perhaps you want to use it for academic skills. And so it then guides you to the page that gives you an example of how to apply video self-modeling to that.
I was just going to add to that the book is basically inclusive of all the applications you could use with video self-modeling. There are probably more, but we tried to make it inclusive of everything you could apply it to. But today we don't have time to go through all of those. But when I get to my part, I'll do the best I can to give you a pretty decent sampling of all the areas that you could apply the approach to.
Yeah, absolutely. So first thing we'll do is define video self-modeling. And in video self-modeling, I'm going to actually read this quote just because it really clearly states what it is. It's the use of video to depict the child, actually it can be adult also, but to depict the child as a model, engage in appropriate and exemplary behavior as a treatment to improve target behaviors. And by exemplary behavior, we mean you actually are going to edit out any behaviors that you don't want seen or you don't want the child to be replicating. right? So we only want the behaviors that you want the child to model. That's what's shown on the video. So it's different from, first of all, it's different from peer modeling in that it's the child themselves acting as their own model. And we'll get to that in a minute about why that's the case, the theory behind that. And it's also different from just straight up videotaping where you would perhaps show the errors and use it as a way to evaluate errors. We're taking all that out with video self-modeling. So it's only based on positive behaviors. So because of that, it's an extremely positive intervention because you're only showing the positive sides of things. So again, you yourself are your own model. How do we get it to be, how do you get the behavior on the videotape? Well, it takes sometimes some careful prompting to get exactly what you want shown, but it can also just be as easy as videotaping what the child's doing throughout the day. It may be that the child's already exhibiting the behavior, and you can just edit out the unwanted behaviors that occur in between. So it's fairly simple to do. So essentially, the child's going to learn a goal behavior, and the goal behavior can really be almost anything that can be physically observed. There's reams of research that they've tried video self-modeling across many, many different behaviors. So we feel very confident that if you think it could be applied to a new situation and you don't have any research behind it specifically to that particular behavior, you have enough evidence to say, yeah, you should really try video self-modeling with it.
Well, when I go through the applications, I'll be covering a sampling of academic applications, social, physical, and communication. So basically, you know, yeah, there's a wide range of coverage in different categories.
Right, and as long as you can observe the behavior, you can show it on video self-modeling. So the goal behavior can also be something that you already know how to do, that the child already knows how to do, or a behavior that might be out of their reach, still developmentally appropriate, but something that they don't quite do just yet. So for example, if there's a child that does one-word utterances, but you're trying to extend them to 2- and 3-word utterances, you can videotape them doing each single word and then stream the video together just through editing, so it looks as though they are saying 3 words together. And it's been shown to work with that, among others, many, many other behaviors. So who can benefit from video self-modeling? The research has shown that across a wide variety of developmental levels and different presentations of disorders and no disorders, folks benefit from this, anywhere from preschool up through adult. It has been used for folks and characteristics associated with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism, a lot of research on autism, emotional disorders such as depression and anxiety, and we'll get into these examples shortly. But people with intellectual disabilities, I've done some research with folks with Down syndrome, sort of across the board, effective. Now, not to say that there aren't times that it's not effective, but the vast majority of times it is effective. So people with speech and language disorders, such as stuttering, children with selective mutism who speak fluently in the home environment but don't speak at all in the school environment, really, you know, there are very few limitations on who you can apply video self-modeling to. And the kinds of behaviors it works for, and this is just a partial listing, but just to give you examples, as you can see, it works for academic skills such as math, reading, even writing skills, highly effective with social skills, sports skills even, so free throw shooting has been used for children with spina bifida learning how to swim, children with physical disabilities learning to walk over obstacles that they previously could not do. A whole host of different behaviors it's been effective for.
Just keep in mind, and she did a pretty good job there of going over all the sample behaviors, but I wanted to add that internalizing and externalizing, that's important because it can be applied to both. And when I get to the examples, I'll explain to you how with internalizing, what observables you can use to work on those kinds of, like depression and things like that.
Exactly. So the key components, again, it's the person themselves on the video, just showing their own goal behavior. only the exemplary behavior is shown in the final video. And keep it, well, actually, and you should know that the final videos are only between about 30 seconds to 2 to 3 minutes long. They're not long at all, and they're only watched every 2 to 3 days. So it's not an intrusive intervention by any means. It's quite simple to, from the student's perspective, and really from your perspective as well. The goals that you're, the behavioral goals that you're using video self-modeling for should be, of course, developmentally appropriate. We're not going to take a child that can do one-word utterances and expect by one video that they're going to be doing a soliloquy, right? It's going to be, has to be something that's within their range, so we have gradual growth. And so for that instance, you know, we could get them, the child, from 1 word to 3 words, and then we could make a new video and get them up to 5 and 6 words, and we can keep scaffolding and building the skill set. And there are, of course, moral and ethical considerations that you should consider, because this is a very powerful technique. So it's important that the behaviors that you're changing are problematic for the child, and also that the ones you're replacing them with are beneficial to the child, either to their academic life, their social life, or their independence, essentially. So largely there are, in general, 4 things that video self-modeling is used for. So learning new behaviors that the child perhaps doesn't already do. So for instance, if you're trying to teach a child how to do an appropriate greeting, say a 3rd grade child, and you want to teach an appropriate greeting with a peer, you might teach them to do a fist bump. It's something that they perhaps haven't seen, where you're taking one fist, right, and pumping it up to the fist of another child. Which I'm sure you've all seen your students do. We're not going to teach them how to shake hands necessarily and say, hello, how are you? Because 3rd graders don't treat each other that way, and they don't greet each other in that manner. But a fist bump is an age-appropriate goal, and the child may not ever have seen that or done that before, so it might be a new behavior to them. So in that sense, you're teaching them a new behavior as far as greeting, a way to greet people. So we can teach new behaviors. We can increase the use of existing useful behaviors. So perhaps you have a child that knows how to raise their hand in the classroom, but boy, sure doesn't do it very often, and it's problematic. So they know how to do the behavior, but they're not doing it often enough. And so we can increase the use of the hand raising. We can also, if a child has learned a new skill, so let's say you're a speech language pathologist, you've worked with somebody who stutters, you've taught them a new technique, a new breathing technique that's been beneficial to them, and they're now speaking more fluently, you can use that video to help them maintain that skill over time.
Well, I can get into a little bit more when I talk about stuttering and how VSM works for that, but for just a quick note for how something would be maintained would be if I either help an individual become fluent through the direct application of video self-modeling, or perhaps maybe I've done it through traditional therapy with a speech pathologist, that would be fine too. But because you can use video self-modeling to maintain the behavior, where they would, it's kind of like a self-help or self-therapy. They've used those terms in the research, that, you know, many people like to use this just to keep it going. They need an extra dose of the treatment, so they watch their video at home every once in a while. And that's how it helps to maintain something over time.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And then the 4th way is to generalize behaviors from one environment to another. So if we go back and talk about the child with selective mutism, for those of you that are not familiar with that, children with selective mutism typically speak fluently and normally in their home environment, but don't utter anything in the school environment. And this can go on for months to years. And there tends to be, you know, a lot of therapy involved, but therapy tends to not be as highly effective. So with video self-modeling, in the case of somebody who has selective mutism, we can generalize this fluent speaking behavior from the home environment to the school environment. And Melissa Bray will explain how when we get into the next section. But it's really powerful. So those are the 4 ways that you can use video self-modeling. So the theories behind video self-modeling, there are several. The original theory was based on Albert Bandura's social learning theory, and that still has a lot of favorable support to this day. And with Bandura's social learning theory, he said, hey, humans learn by watching other humans. And he postulated that the more similar the model is to the person doing the modeling, the more likely they are to model the behavior. So the original two researchers doing video self-modeling, who we'll get to in a minute, they took Bandura's theory and they said, well, if the model should be similar to you, or the more similar it is to you, the more likely you are to model the behavior, what if you yourself were your own model? And so they started using videotape to use you yourself as your own model and found it to be highly effective. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So that's the original theory behind it, which still holds a lot of water. There are other theories that have developed. I'm going to let Melissa Bray talk about autobiographical memory changes here.
Sure. The other reasons, like Melissa Root just said, okay, it could be straight learning. You're modeling and watching and you're learning and changing the behavior. Another viable theory that's been looked at and has some good results is that it's a change in your memory. And that means that the individuals are watching these videos and there's something subtle going on that changes their memory of the behavior, and they somehow feel that they can do this or have done it. So there's been research that looked at autobiographical memory specifically, and that was shown to be what they thought that was the mechanism for change. So that's very possible, and that kind of links with, I don't know if you're familiar with the research where, memory research, which is quite interesting, and certainly in court cases and such, where that they can show that somebody looks at something, they think they actually did that where they never did. The picture, looking at a picture of yourself in some scene, or there's a famous case where they were on a hot air balloon and the person was never on a hot air balloon, but you absolutely believe that. It's a subtle change to your memory. So that certainly is a viable mechanism.
And then another recent one that was postulated by Peter Dorick is that he refers to it as mental time travel. Where essentially you're seeing yourself in the future, essentially seeing behavior that you're capable of. But regardless of the theory behind it, we know that it works. Is essentially the biggest component you should take away from today. So back to that first study that I mentioned. So Thomas Creer and Donald Mechlick studied in 1970. That was the first video self-modeling study done. And they were working with a child, his name was Chuck, and he was living in a hospital for children with intractable asthma, because at that time we didn't have rescue inhalers. So children had to live long-term for months on end in the hospital. So Chuck lived in such a situation, and he had some problematic behaviors. He would not wake up in the morning, or not, get out of bed appropriately in the morning, delayed quite a bit. When he went to visit with service providers, he would inappropriately go and climb in their laps. When other children would interact with him, there would be some bullying, and his response wasn't beneficial to that situation. And essentially, so there were four problem behaviors that they filmed. So they filmed his original behaviors just as they were. And then they wrote a few scripts. And they said, this is how we'd like you to respond in this situation. And so they did some videotaping. They said, hey, we want to make a movie of you. You're going to be the star of the movie. And Melissa and I can both tell you, kids love hearing that. They respond extremely well to being told they're going to be the star of a movie, which is always how we start the intervention working with children. So Chuck was excited, and they told him, all right, let's go into your bedroom and let's pretend it's morning and have you get up out of bed in the morning. And so they filmed him doing it appropriately. And then, they taught him how to appropriately greet his service provider, and, to not sit in the lap, but as maybe perhaps do a handshake or just greet hello and have a seat in a separate location. And gave him a script for how to respond to the bullying behavior. So they made the two tapes, one of his original behavior, one of the new improved behavior. They showed him the new improved behavior for 2 weeks, and he improved drastically. Then they showed him his original behavior for 2 weeks, and he reverted back to the old bad behavior, unfortunately. And then they reversed it again until the time that he left 5 months later, and he maintained that good behavior for 5 months. So it really showed the power of video self-modeling, and how just watching that videotape really changed the way that the child responded. So since then, there's been so much research completed So you might be asking yourself, well, Melissa, why is this not in the schools already? It's been 45 years, 46 years of great research. And the reason is because when Melissa and I started doing this in the 1990s, which is already 20 years after the original study, this was the equipment that we needed. This is some of the equipment that we needed. So you needed to have a camcorder, which some of you may recall what these look like. You needed 2 VCR tapes and a VCR player. And you needed one of those large televisions that we don't see anymore, but a big old heavy television to be able to show. So you needed the camcorder to, record the video, the VCR to play it, the television also for playing it, and then you needed 2 of these side-by-side editing equipments, which was really expensive. And so essentially the only people that could do this kind of research were people at large universities, people that had a lot of money coming in through grants. People in the public schools did not have the money to do this kind of work and also didn't have the time for it. But today, with the advent of the iPad and your smartphones, you can do all of it. You can record the behavior, you can edit the behavior, and you can show it on one device. And the editing equipment is free. Well, not the iPad itself, but the software to do the editing is free. So it's extremely, extremely accessible to folks now. So Melissa, Bray, and I really felt strongly it's time to get this intervention into people's hands. So that's what we're doing, is trying to share this with all of you. Oops, sorry about that. So beyond that, because there's so much fantastic research, it has been declared an evidence-based practice by both the Council for Exceptional Children and the National Professional Development Center for those with autism spectrum disorder. So you can comfortably go back to your school districts and say, hey, this is a great practice that we should start incorporating, because it really is, and it's proven and got the stamp of approval of an evidence-based practice. So now I'm going to move ahead and let Melissa Bray talk about some of the video self-modeling applications. Good. Just talk. Oh, I thought it was shown, but I think so.
All right, I was going to almost put on the video so you could see me for a second. She's going to maybe do that for me. Yeah. Okay, just so I can say hello, you can see who I am. I'm going to talk about all the applications for video self-modeling, and Melissa will, chime in. And we'll leave our pictures on for a second, but just quickly going back to the old equipment, it just brings back always a smile every time I see it, because we spend hours on that editing videos, and the time that it takes now is so minimal. On my part, on the student's part, and it's really quite easy. So like she said, it's time for more people to use this. Okay, so there's a host of different applications. I'm going to go through the ones that we picked out that we thought seemed appropriate as a sampling. Let's start with some academic writing, for instance. We want to get our kids to use more expressive writing, and it doesn't really matter the style, because you could focus on essays or research papers, and depends on the age of the child what would be appropriate. The way that it's been done is that the video would show the student writing more on the video, so they're modeling themselves writing more, using strategies. So I could superimpose a story map, or if those of you who know who XQ3 are or XQ4 are, they're all strategies on writing. You can also model the revision process, so that the student is learning. First, I write an introductory paragraph. I have a thesis statement, maybe the outline, and then showing them, I've done a 5-paragraph essay, things like that. So you're having them model the skills that you want specifically to learn for expressive writing, and that's been quite successful. Okay, reading fluency. I've done a number of studies of those myself, and just practical studies in, just working with kids in the schools, not even research studies. Reading fluency is very easy to do. The word that first comes to me is scaffolding, because like Melissa said, it depends on where you're going with a child. And if you're using a standard metric like a DIBELS or words correct per minute, you're going to want to know where the child is, obviously, and this is common practice, and where you want them to go with the target behavior. So you can scaffold them on using video self-modeling. So you'd video them reading. This is how we've done it, at a words correct per minute speed that they can handle, and then when they come back, you keep moving that up. So you have a sort of graduated learning until they meet the target behavior of words correct per minute for their age and grade. And that's been very successful. You can pair it if you want to with a self-monitoring strategy where they also see on a graph that they're working towards their goal, but you really don't even need to add that. Video self-modeling alone will work. And you start just a little bit ahead of where they are on words correct per minute. So we've usually gone up by five words more than where they're at, and they watch that and they actually model that, and they will move along according to that fluency metric. So it's quite effective.
Yeah, and there's been other studies that look at oral reading fluency, and they have just to capture it on the film, they'll have doing echo reading just to get take them from their current level of reading to a more advanced level, and again, very successful.
Yeah, you cue them to read a little faster, or I can edit the video to make it appear faster. English language learners. That's been used for reading fluency amongst other behaviors, but this video self-modeling technique is very appropriate for students that have English as a second language or any type of English language learner, because it's used for their social grasp of language. We show that on video. They have multiple targets that you're looking for with language acquisition. So that the communication with friends, appropriate greetings, they're all modeled on the video. Reading comprehension, we've used it for reading comprehension many times. My colleagues have. That is having the student on the video shown reading material, but applying a strategy to comprehend the text. And many times we superimpose that strategy, like the story map you're looking at, right onto the video so that they see themselves using it. And that's also, it's right there in front of them, and it really facilitates after a while you can fade that out and not even have that because they've internalized the strategy, and it's effective in them using that to attack material. And you'll see the, concomitant increases in their assessment. So if you're, doing a progress monitoring technique, you'll see their reading comprehension is improving along with the treatment.
Yeah, so there was a study that had the students also not only using the graphic organizer, but then also successfully answering comprehension questions on the video. And in that particular study, they found significant gains that were maintained for 6 months, even though the video watching had ceased. They were still they still maintained those gains over time.
And you notice I keep bringing up data, and that's important, and that's why we worked hard to include in this book data collection, reproducibles that you can use that will give you the outcome-driven data that's required in in schools today under IDEA and such, and which makes sense for progress monitoring to keep track of how the video self-modeling is working. So that's quite important, and I think they are pretty handy, the ones that you'll find that in the book that would be easy to use.
That's right.
I'm going to let Melissa explain this one.
Yeah, so this is also related to reading, the more rudimentary skill of letter identification. There was a study done with students who had autism between the ages of 4 and 9, and they taught them to identify novel letters, but they used Greek letters since they wanted to have something the students had not been exposed to before, to really make sure that they were learning the skill of letter identification. And this study was interesting because they prompted them and showed them successfully identifying the letters on the video. And this was interesting because they also they not only did self-modeling videos where the child themselves is their own model, but they also did peer modeling where they were watching another child successfully identify the letters. And in this study, there was much better success rate when the students were watching their self-model video versus the peer model video. So that was a really interesting study, but again, really useful across academic skills.
Yeah, the basic skills can be easily covered. For instance, mathematics, it's been used for not only math computation, math application. Students have been, on the video shown attacking where kids have trouble with word problems and the language behind them. So the video would show the students looking at, word problem solving and attacking those words, like, for instance, the word of, if that means to multiply. It teaches them those kinds of skills that they're missing by modeling themselves using them. And the same goes for math computation problems, division, etc. There's been many, many replications of using VSM for behavior change. non-compliance in kids is a major problem. That's the kind of the root of everything, if you can get a child to comply with what you're asking. But what's linked to that is inattention, aggression, and the video can show the child with exemplary behavior. In other words, there's no aggressive acts, they're attending to the instruction, they're complying to teacher requests, and that's done kind of like what Melissa was telling you, that you can either edit out all the inappropriate behaviors, you can cue the appropriate, but nonetheless, we have it outlined in the book. There's about 4 or 5 different ways that you can attack making the video, how to get these behaviors, how do you prompt, how do you delete, things like that. But in the end, it's very, very powerful to show the child this tape. And I've seen it with my own eyes. They're raising their hand after it's almost I hate to use the word magical, but it kind of is. When I started as a doctoral student, I read about it. I wanted to try it, and I'll get to what I did for my dissertation in a minute when we get to stuttering. But it is amazing. It really is. So you'll be surprised at how well they'll do following, watching the video for a few short times.
Yeah, no, it is very exciting. I actually, in graduate school, this is Melissa Root talking, in graduate school, our advisor, Tom Kale, would talk to us about using video self-modeling, and I actually badgered him, and I said, I really want to come out with you. I want to see what it looks like. And he said, oh, I can't pay you, you're a student. And I said, I don't want to be paid, I'll volunteer my time. I'll drive myself, I'll meet you there, and that's how we got started. And so we started bringing a few other grad students along and started doing the research. And it really, once you start using it and seeing the effects, it's very exciting.
It's powerful.
So I'll talk about, you want me to talk about this one? So this was a study, so we talk about more extreme non-compliant behaviors. There was a study done with students in a psychiatric hospital. So these were students that had really high non-compliance rates. And again, they used video self-modeling. They showed the students complying, right? When the instruction was given, they actually followed through with the instruction. And they showed not only a significant increase in the amount of compliance that the students were evidencing, but also a significant decrease in the number of times an instruction or direction led to aggression. So these were kids that were, high levels of aggression, and they were lowered significantly. Not to a point of 0, but significantly enough. If you cut that in half, that makes your day, as you can imagine, a lot more pleasant. Not only for the student, but also for the staff member, obviously. So some really, in some extreme environments, there have been some great uses of video self-modeling. So that's why we really encourage people, when you learn this technique, you're going to be pretty excited about it, and you're going to want to try it with across different students, different behaviors. You might even try it on your spouse. Who knows? But go ahead, Melissa.
Oh, here's my thing. Okay, so I'm glad to see this slide because, all right, communication. Now, again, that's where I came from because I was a speech pathologist, and I started with stuttering as my dissertation. And, there's many reasons, for instance, why people stutter, but one of which could be learned behaviors, and it also can be due to anxiety, which we kind of haven't really touched upon as much here, but video self-modeling helps for learning, but it also, it also helps, it's coming, okay, but it helps with behaviors that are, due to an anxiety or a phobia, that sort of thing. But, okay, so stuttering, if you have a child who stutters, and if they stutter in one setting and not in another, you can be pretty darn sure that a learning component is there. And self-modeling will certainly help. But let me tell you right now, because I get this question all the time, what if they stutter all the time in all settings? Is it going to work? The question is, it's worth a try. It usually does work, and it'll bring the stuttering down by the amount that it was learned. So I had many kids that stuttered the same amount in all settings, but when I applied video self-modeling and showed them not stuttering in those settings, it didn't go down to 0, but I might have taken it down by 40%. It was half is probably at max because there was physiological reasons or some other reasons why they stuttered. But it's very easy to do. One, if the child is fluent in some setting, if they speak to their friend fluently, in other words, that's sort of a less stress environment. That's usually why anxiety is involved. Or they speak to their pet, they can talk to their dog. You use those utterances and edit them in and make it look like they're talking fluently to their teacher or wherever they're having the difficulty. The other way is there's video editing equipment. And one of my students is doing this now in the schools and is working on stuttering, and it's where you can actually use the editing to manipulate the voice. And it does slow the person's voice down. You can take out disfluent speech and replace it with fluent, and there's ways to do it. So in the end, the video shows the person speaking fluently. And remember, all of this is not a lie or a trick. Everybody who's doing this, the kids, you tell them, this is what we want you to do, whether it's selective mute or disruptive, these are the goal behaviors for you, and they model after it. So in addition to stuttering, and I'm most biased and excited over stuttering, because stuttering is a tough one. And, I guess there's worse things in life, but it's not easy to go through school with, if you can't speak in front of groups. And this is a viable component. It's been replicated a number of times and internationally.
Yeah, and I'd like to put props to Melissa because she pioneered the work on video self-modeling with stuttering. So you have the expert, the worldwide expert right here on your computer right now.
Thank you.
Really is.
She made my day. But I am. And again, when I first did that, I thought it had merit because it was done on audio by Ray Hosford originally, and it worked. And I was the first to do a video, but it's amazing to see, and it's certainly worth a try. And I'd be glad to help anybody, and Melissa Root as well with that. Again, for communication and language, you could use it for language impairment. I mean, there's kids with language disorders where you're going to show on video, hey, the kind of mean length of utterance. What kind of sentence do we want them to say? What are we looking for in expressive language or receptive language that we can depict visually? Because remember, it's got to be something we can show on video. So there's many other studies where they use, she's had some samplings here, verbs, increasing number of words, syntactical with grammar kind of improvements. All kinds of things. So there's a whole host of applications under the category of communication, speech, and language.
And so again, the biggest point for you to take out of this is it works. It's been tested across a wide variety of behaviors. And so we really encourage folks to be creative in thinking of applications they can use it with.
Right. She has a good point there. But we're going over, we tend to stick to what's empirically based, but you can get creative, and there's no harm in trying it to anything if it's ethically responsible.
Yep.
I'm glad we got to depression because that's one on my mind, to make sure that I get across to you that internalizing behaviors can be tricky because you don't always see easily outward signs. Yeah, if somebody's aggressive or an externalizer, yeah, of course, it's grabbing the teacher's attention. But there's kids where you have to look for lack of eye contact, fidgeting for anxiety, staring out windows, sad affect. But Alan Kasdan had a really nice article once that kind of defined those kind of things. You can see outward signs of depression, of anxiety, and that's what you do. You take, if a child has depression or has anxiety, whether it could be already formally diagnosed or it's something that you're seeing at a tier 1 level or tier 2 level in a school, you can apply video self-modeling. And what you do for depression, there's a number of studies where they show the child smiling. They cued the child to smile.
Sit up straight.
Sit up straight. They fix their hair, wear the right outfit, interacting happily with other children. Anxiety would be showing less fidgeting, calm reactions, and that's coming next. But you get the idea.
And so the one on the study on depression, one in particular, the child's perceptions of their depression improved drastically, and the parents' data also corroborated that. So they were also noticing a significant change in their child, which is really powerful. So here's the anxiety one.
Okay, so anxiety, as you know, and stress is certainly on the rise from young children on up, especially, well, stress, but anxiety disorders, to the point that it's really, I think, alarming to psychologists to see the stress and anxiety through high schools and college and suicide rates and what have you. So there's other ways you can approach anxiety, but one viable, empirically supported one certainly is video self-modeling, and it's easy to do. It needs to be tried more. You show these kids on a video. Let's say they are just anxious in the classroom relative to being called on or during test anxiety situations. A lot of test anxiety out there with high school and college kids. Remember, we talk a lot about, K through 12, but this certainly is through adults, where you can show a video of somebody taking a test with appropriate breathing, calm affect, and it really is potent in decreasing their feelings, their self-reported feelings of stress and anxiety. So it's something that is very important.
Yeah, so there were a few studies done. There was one done with adults, typically developing adults who had some public speaking anxiety. So you think at the college level, folks trying to do those presentations in front of a class. There was another study with counselor trainees and their anxiety, at being reviewed for their training sessions, and their self-confidence was up significantly when they watched their video self-modeling video. And then there's another study with a woman. She had post-traumatic stress disorder. She had extreme fears around children. They couldn't be in a room with children. So imagine how debilitating that is. You can't go to a restaurant. You can't go to a store. I mean, it's extremely, extremely limiting to your life. And so the first videos actually just showed someone else's hand holding a rattle, or being, a body part near a child, but it wasn't actually this woman's. But through editing, you can make it appear as though she's closer and closer to a child. And they got to the point where she was able, through subsequent videos, she was able to then be around children. I don't know that she was ever happy around children, but she certainly was able to exist around them, which, is a significant gain.
Yeah, fears and phobias is appropriate.
Yep.
Well, I'm glad we got to physical ed, because that's what I was thinking as I've been talking so much about, emotional and social problems and academic and communication, but you cannot discount the physical side. And video self-modeling has been used for all kinds of things. From our advisor had used it for basketball, and not just him, increasing free throw shooting, swimming, golf, baseball, all kinds of things where you're showing on the video the appropriate behavior, nothing negative, remember, because they'll model after it if you do that. We don't want to show errors or learn from errors on video. That's a no-no. You want to show only positive and exemplary physical performance. And it can be pieced together. Remember, you're not going to teach somebody to do a complicated dive into a swimming pool when they're not able to. But if they can have in their repertoire the pieces, you can put them together in a sequence to facilitate the behavior. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
What I said. You're going to talk a little about the time of exhaustion.
Melissa's
going to fill in here.
So there was a study very recently done, I think 2015, that looked at elite runners, and they had a video of themselves running at their optimal pace, and they ran on a treadmill. And while their heart rate and all the physical symptoms were the same, whether they were watching their video or not watching the video, their perceptions of being exhausted were, it came at a much later time. So they were able to run at that optimal level much longer than when they weren't watching the video. So really powerful. And the folks with spina bifida, there are a lot of fears associated with going in the pool, because even to be able to touch the bottom of the pool, it's much deeper to them because of physical limitations from the spina bifida. So there are a lot of fears associated with that, and we're able to get folks to be able to swim. So,
well, the social applications are vast for video self-modeling. From, with any regular general ed kids that have social skill deficits that, of course, go along with a host of diagnoses, but maybe not, and they're just at a point where you want to work at a tier 1 level with kids that, say, can't initiate conversation, can't have a contingent response to a conversation, are not taking and receiving compliments appropriately. All of those kinds of standard social skills areas. Now, the reason I love video self-modeling for social skills, and this is important, is because I'm not sure if you all know, but you probably do, that we can do a pretty good job of establishing these social skill behaviors in your school, in an office, in a classroom, in your school psych office. But to try to get them to transfer to other settings, to generalize and maintain, has been historically problematic, if not impossible. Whereas video self-modeling, that's one of the key features that has been shown, is that it can generalize behaviors, it can maintain them. So if you can teach social skills, and you can teach them any way you want. You can teach them with this video self-modeling, but say you don't want to and you're doing a role play or another way, you can use video self-modeling then to maintain that and generalize it, and that's very important. Here first we have selective mutism, because that's, of course, they have social communication issues, and I'll talk about selective mutism, but just remember it's for all social skills. The selective mutism is an interesting diagnosis, and it's where video self-modeling is pretty much the top choice to treat. There are other ways you can do it, behavioral ways. They take much longer, but video self-modeling will show that child speaking appropriately to the classroom teacher in the school, where they classically do not speak and they speak at home. The way you do it is, most times, 9 times out of 10, the child will speak at the end of the day when the rest of the kids have gone home. Buses, that's what I had always learned. It's held true. Buses are gone, and if you bring the parent in, and alone in a room, have them ask the child a series of questions that the child will answer to the parent. Not yes, no questions, of course, but something like, what's your favorite ice cream? What did you like about a field trip? And then those same questions are asked earlier in that school day by the teacher, and that child is asked, and so is a couple other kids in the class. What did you like about the hayride? And then they answer. But the child with selective mutism, of course, will not respond when you go to them. They'll just sit there. And that's fine, because later you take that utterance that you got with the parent in the same classroom at the end of the school day and edit that into the video so it looks like that child is speaking to the teacher. And that's what they watch later. And it also can be shown with permission by the child to the whole classroom, which just sets up the expectation that, hey, this kid can talk. They hear him talking. They see him talking to the teacher now, and you show that very short 2 to 3 minute video, you know, over the course of, hey, you never know. It can take as quick as a couple of viewings. Not to say it can take longer. At that point, if it goes into that you're working 6 months with this child, then you're going to end up usually not. But if you got longer, you'd make an extra video of a new setting, so it's not so, you know, redundant.
Yeah, typically with selective mutism, the child will typically start talking within a couple of viewings, sometimes even just one viewing. And it is thrilling when they start talking because the other kid's like, oh my God, Ellen, you can talk. It's very, very exciting and very socially reinforcing at that point. So it usually maintains itself. But we usually recommend if you've tried something for about 6 weeks and you're not seeing the change, then it's time for perhaps a new video to reevaluate the video that you made to try something different. So we recommend trying it for up to 6 weeks. Again, the child's only watching it every 2 to 3 days, or the adult if you're working with adults, watching it every 2 to 3 days. So it's not intrusive at all. So I'm going to share a couple of stories. So we talked about the selective mutism. I've used it with you know, an 18-year-old with autism who was very high functioning, but so academically doing very well, doing calculus, but you know, the ability to do those independent living skills of, you know, making macaroni and cheese were challenging. He had the individual skill sets of being able to open the drawer, take up a spoon, or the measuring cup, but sequencing them together was difficult. And so we taught him how to sequence the different behaviors together so he could learn some independent living skills, which are so important for people. Worked with another young woman. She was an adolescent who was, it took probably 28 to 35 prompts to get her to take off her jacket. You know, you'd give her the, okay, take off your jacket, Shania, and she'd unzip it maybe half an inch, and then she'd stare off for a while until the next prompt, and then she'd go another half an inch. So, you know, again, we videotaped her doing that, and then just edited out all of the prompts and showed her seamlessly taking off her jacket and hanging it up, and it made significant change in the amount of time it took her to do that. Melissa's already talked about the stuttering, but I'll also talk about a gentleman, Blake, I worked with recently. He's, you know, a 55-year-old gentleman, has a series of disabilities, lives in a residential situation, but would have some aggressive, well, really verbally aggressive behaviors if he didn't get through his morning routine, and would not be able to go out to work for the day when he'd have those. And he'd have them every couple of days. Actually, I'm going to show you his data right here. So, you know, he would have these, they call them level 3 behaviors at the place he was living and working. And so he had several of them until he started watching his video. This was actually a 4-minute video because I had to get through his entire morning routine. So we showed him, you know, making his bed, having his breakfast, getting his treatments. And once he started watching that video, as you can see from the data, he'd never had the level 3 behaviors again. So it was stunning data. And this is not data that I collected. This is data that the staff that work with him daily were already collecting and continued to collect. And that's the other key thing with this is you really want to have the same data collected over time so you can really see that you're making a difference. Your memory of what happened and what the behavior used to be will be off as well. So just keep some data so that you can really show this kind of change. It's very powerful. So we're just going to finish up here in a few minutes and then take your questions. So going back to the book itself, again, we lay it out in 7 steps. I'm briefly going to let you know, you select your goal behavior and define it. Start collecting that data if you haven't already been collecting it. plan your video. Just figure out how to prompt the behavior, whether you want to do a script, whether you want to just film that as they normally do their behaviors, whether you want to, hold up a sign behind the camera that says raise your hand, or whatever you need to use to get the behavior on the video. So you record and edit the video, and we talk about how to do that in the book. There's an appendix that talks about how to do the editing. And I know it sounds complicated, but I actually do a training with folks in the schools, and I've had people that don't even know how to turn on their iPads, and by the end of the training, which is just about a 2-hour training, they're saying, oh my gosh, this is so great. You can separate the audio, you can add in audio, and it's very simple. You can very easily take things out, you can remove things. If you like a certain scene, you can repeat it. It's easy to do. And then we talk about how to view the video, how often and where, and how to decide if it's working or not. And so the last thing is, we superimpose those 7 steps over specific examples. So across behaviors like depression, anxiety, all those great things. We have the visual index, which I mentioned earlier. And the best part, again, those free downloadable data forms that you can use. If you want to purchase the book, you can go to Pacific Northwest Publishing, which is the excellent publisher we used for this. They were wonderful to work with. And the website is listed there for you. I'll leave this up here for a moment for you. But really, they're a top-notch group to work with. They have some other wonderful products as well. So it's probably worth your time to go to their website and check out their offerings. And if you are interested in professional development trainings on how to actually use video self-modeling, I do those as well in school systems. I do them at colleges. I do them at group home settings. I've worked with lots of professionals and have some great trainings available. So if anybody's interested in that, I'm very happy. I'm happy to travel to do that, whatever it takes. Again, I mentioned earlier, the goal of my company is really to get this technique out into practitioners' hands because it is so great and really so simple to do. So really, with some simple training, you can really go off and take it and do some great things with the folks that you're working with. So on that, Jackie, I guess we're ready for questions if anybody has any questions.
Okay, I can run through the questions that I see in the chat for you. One question is, will we make the handout available? We can take that and include that on the website when we post the video. We can post copies of the slides. The question about getting the book, it's available through Pacific Northwest Publishing, and it's $28. You can order that online, or you can order with a purchase order by sending an email to orders@pacificnwpublish.com. One of the questions here I have, it says, for a child that has complex communication needs, nonverbal, starting to use an AAC, how would you video self-model? Is it more the partner that would be the focus of the video?
So on that one, I would suggest, showing the child themselves using the communication device. You may have to obviously do some prompting to get that shown on the video itself, but it would really be the child themselves successfully using the AAC device. So, precisely that the teacher would probably do the prompting to say, here's the question, what would you like for lunch, perhaps, or, whatever the question might be. But the video itself would just show the child then answering on his own. Now, it may take prompting. It may even take a teacher's hand to move their hand onto the right key, but the video itself would only show the child doing that. So the adult prompt would be removed, depending on the level of the child's learning on the AAC. You can advance depending on that. But
we have a couple questions about the names of the free video editing apps available for iPhones and iPads.
Sure, absolutely. So iMovie is the simplest. It's free. You can download it to your iPad, to your phone. I know that there are free ones for the Android as well. Melissa's just looking this up for me right now. KineMaster is the one for Android devices. So, we're not recommending any particular one. You can certainly use whatever one you're interested in, but those are some that are free. My personal preference is using iMovie on the iPad. I find that interface much simpler than I do using iMovie on the laptop or desktop, to be honest with you. It's more intuitive on the iPad than it is on the desktop computer. But that's my personal preference, so I'd leave that open to people to try. But both iMovie and KineMaster are free and available on Androids or Mac devices.
Okay. I have a question that says, how many times a day do you watch the video?
So great question. The video is actually only watched every 2 to 3 days. So just once a day, every couple of days.
Yeah, you don't have to watch it more than one time. It's one viewing and then spaced viewings.
Right.
Melissa, I don't know off the top of my head if we have we got some sample videos that we could make available on our website or that we could share with folks?
So we do not, but I would recommend, there's a video that Tom Buggey, B-U-G-G-E-Y, has available. If you just Google that on, through YouTube, he has an example. It's got several examples within there of, one child socializing. There's another child who is expanding the number of foods that they eat. She only ate 4 foods, and they expanded her, I think, to maybe 33 or something. So, it's another behavior we haven't talked about today, but another application. So that's a good one to look at. I caution people when you Google video self-modeling, some of the examples that come up are not actually video self-modeling. They're just modeling. So the Tom Buggey one I know is a correct one. So that's a good one to look at.
Okay. We have another question about how do you overcome / work around ethical considerations in a school setting?
So we do have there's actually a worksheet or a downloadable form that we have affiliated with the book that takes you through, it's pretty simple, but takes you through a series of questions that you can ask yourself. It's simple yes/no questions of, is this current behavior impacting, is it detrimental to their social life? Is it detrimental to their independent living or to their academics? And the reverse for the replacement behavior. So there's a great downloadable form available with the book that can help guide you through that.
Okay. I think that might be all our questions. There was the one question about when the webinar will be available. It's typically just 1 to 2 days after we wrap up here before we can get that up on our website, but we will send an email out to everybody who is registered that has that link, and you'll be able to share that with anybody else you'd like to pass the information along to. We'll keep things open another minute or two here to see if there's any additional questions in the meantime. Melissa, we very much appreciate you sharing this valuable information today. And also, all of our guests today viewing the webinar, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules with school to view this webinar and get this information. As I mentioned, we'll have the recording information going out in just a couple days. In November, on November 30th, we will be doing another webinar that will look at the recently published First Step Next series of materials, which is a Tier 2 intervention system for young students. If you're interested in that, you can sign up for that webinar at the Pacific Northwest Publishing website. It looks to me like we've got all our questions in. Oh, here's one more. Dorothy, the cost of change staff, we'll pass your information along to Melissa to get back to you on that. I have a question. Do you have example permission forms that you've used in the past for parental consent to videotape for self-modeling?
We do. If somebody needs that, we could forward that.
Yeah, feel free to contact us.
Okay. Terrific. I have one last question that's not video self-monitoring. Oh, maybe more coming in. Certificates for CEU credits for attending the webinar. Unfortunately, we are not able to do anything that's accredited. We can send a note, email that says that you participated in the webinar, which may or may not be of value to your Human Resources Department for what you're looking for. But please feel free to email me at info@pacificnwpublish.com, and we can put something together for you. And I think I'm going to do a last call here.
Back to that person who wanted to know about the permissions for video, that's in some districts, if you're going to video of other classmates, you'd want to consider that, what their policy is, just so you remember that, if other children, are, of course, are on the video.
And thank you, everybody, for attending. We really, really appreciate your time. If you want the question about getting the permission slip, go ahead and email me. I think my email is up on the page right now, root.success.solutions@gmail.com, and I can forward you a sample permission form.
Terrific, everyone. We, again, appreciate you taking your time and getting the rundown on Picture Perfect.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.